Grace Turner stood at her easel on the wooden deck of her cottage, watching the morning sun paint the ocean in shades of amber and gold. Her brush moved across the canvas in gentle strokes, capturing the way light danced on water. This was her life now. Peaceful, quiet, predictable. Exactly what she needed. At 67, Grace had the kind of face that held stories. Deep lines around her eyes spoke of years spent squinting in harsh sunlight. Her silver hair, always tied back in a simple braid, caught the morning breeze. Her hands, steady despite her age, moved with practiced confidence across the canvas. The cottage she called home sat on the edge of Seaview, a small coastal town where everyone knew everyone and nothing much ever happened. That was precisely why she had chosen it 25 years ago. After decades of chaos, she craved the ordinary. "Morning, Grace," called Mrs. Henderson from the beach path below. The elderly woman walked her golden retriever every morning at the same time. "Good morning, Martha," Grace called back, waving her paintbrush. "Beautiful day. Perfect day for the farmer's market. Will you have paintings there?" "3 new ones. Come by the gallery booth." This was her routine. Paint in the mornings when the light was best. Work at the Seaview Art Gallery 3 afternoons a week. Teach painting classes to local children on Saturdays. Tend her small garden. Read books. Drink tea. A simple life. Nobody in Seaview knew about her past. They knew Grace Turner, the kind lady who painted seascapes and helped at community events. They did not know about Grace Turner, the war photographer whose images had appeared on the front pages of major newspapers around the world. That person was gone, dead and buried like her friend Sarah. Grace set down her brush and walked inside to make tea. Her cottage was small but comfortable, filled with her paintings and a few carefully chosen pieces of furniture. No photographs on the walls. She did not keep photographs anymore. She could not. The kitchen window looked out toward the town. Seaview spread along the coast like a string of pearls. Small houses, the harbor with fishing boats, the main street with its shops and cafes, the old lighthouse on the point. A population of maybe 3,000 people growing a bit in summer with tourists, shrinking in winter to just the locals. Grace had arrived here 25 years ago, broken and seeking peace. She was 42 then, at the peak of her career, famous in her field. Then came the explosion in Syria. One moment she was photographing a family returning to their damaged home. The next moment, the world turned into fire and noise and Sarah's scream. Sarah Brennan, her colleague, her friend, her companion through a dozen war zones, gone in an instant. Grace survived with only minor injuries, a cut on her forehead, bruised ribs, ringing in her ears that lasted for weeks. But something inside her shattered. She could not pick up a camera again, could not look through a viewfinder, could not press the shutter button. The trauma ran too deep. She remembered the therapist she saw in London. "You associated your camera with Sarah's death," Dr. Morrison had said. "It represents that moment of trauma. Your mind is protecting you from reliving it." So Grace had done what she needed to survive. She sold her expensive cameras, gave away her photography equipment, and searched for a new life. She found Seaview by accident, driving along the coast, looking for something. When she saw the small town by the sea, something in her chest loosened. She rented a cottage. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. She started painting to fill her days, discovered she had talent for it. Eventually, she became part of the town's fabric. Now, 25 years later, Grace Turner was simply the nice lady who painted ocean scenes. Her past was locked away, and she intended to keep it that way. She finished her tea and cleaned her brushes. Time to prepare for the farmer's market. She loaded 3 new paintings into her car, two seascapes, and one of the lighthouse at sunset. The gallery had a booth at the market every Saturday, and Grace often helped. The market filled the town square with colorful stalls. Local farmers sold vegetables and fruits. Craftspeople offered handmade goods. The bakery had a stall with fresh bread and pastries. The coffee shop served drinks from a portable station. Children ran between the stalls while parents shopped and chatted with neighbors. "Grace, over here," called Daniel, the young man who managed the art gallery. He was setting up the booth with paintings and sculptures from local artists. Grace helped arrange the artwork. Her paintings always sold well. Tourists loved her ocean scenes, and locals bought them as gifts. She did not need the money. She had savings from her photography career, but she enjoyed the sense of purpose it gave her. "How's business been?" Grace asked. "Good. We sold 4 paintings last week. 2 of yours, actually. The couple from Boston who bought the beach scene asked if you take commissions." "Perhaps. If they come back, send them to talk to me." The market filled with people. Grace spoke with customers about her paintings, recommended other local artists, and enjoyed watching the town come alive. She knew most people here, the Hendersons with their dog, young Jamie, who worked at the coffee shop, old Mr. Peterson, who still went fishing every day despite being 90, the Martinez family, who ran the best restaurant in town. Around noon, Grace noticed something unusual. A man she did not recognize stood near the edge of the market, watching. He wore dark clothes despite the warm day, and his eyes scanned the crowd with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. It was the way he looked at people, assessing, calculating. Grace had learned in war zones to notice things, details that others missed, body language that suggested danger. This man had that energy. He was not shopping. He was not relaxed like the tourists. He was working. She watched him from the corner of her eye while pretending to adjust her paintings. After about 10 minutes, he walked away, heading toward the harbor. "Did you see that man?" Grace asked Daniel quietly. "Which one?" "Dark jacket, black cap. He was standing over by the bakery stall." "No, I didn't notice." "Why?" "Just something about him seemed off." Daniel laughed. "You and your people watching. You should write mystery novels." Grace smiled but said nothing. Maybe she was being paranoid. 25 years away from danger, and she still saw threats everywhere. The therapist had mentioned that too. Hypervigilance, a common response to trauma. But as the market continued, Grace could not shake the feeling. Something about that man troubled her. Later that afternoon, after the market closed and she had returned home, Grace walked down to the beach. She did this most evenings, walking the shoreline as the sun began to set. The sound of waves calmed her mind. The beach curved around a rocky point where the old lighthouse stood. Beyond that lay the industrial side of town, the harbor where fishing boats docked, the old fish processing plant that had closed 10 years ago, some warehouses. Grace rarely walked that far. There was nothing interesting there, just rusting buildings and empty lots. But today, curiosity pulled her forward. She walked past the lighthouse, along the less used path that led toward the harbor area. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows. The sound of the town faded behind her. The old processing plant came into view, a large, weathered building with broken windows and peeling paint. Signs warned against trespassing. The place had been abandoned since the fishing industry declined. The town council occasionally discussed renovating it, but nothing ever happened. As Grace approached, she noticed something. A light inside one of the buildings. Just a brief flash, then darkness. She stopped walking and watched. Another light, in a different window. Then nothing. She stood there for several minutes, but saw nothing more. Probably just kids exploring, she thought, Or homeless people seeking shelter? Still, something felt wrong. Grace turned back toward her cottage as the sun touched the horizon. Tomorrow was Sunday. She would paint, tend her garden, maybe visit the library. Normal things. But that night, she dreamed about war zones and cameras and running through dark buildings while someone screamed. Sunday morning brought rain, which meant Grace painted indoors. She set up her easel by the window and worked on a commission piece, a painting of a customer's sailboat. The rhythmic sound of rain on the roof was soothing, helping her focus on mixing the exact shade of blue for the hull. By afternoon, the rain stopped, leaving everything fresh and clean. Grace decided to walk into town for supplies. She needed more paint and canvas from the art store and wanted to pick up groceries. Main Street was quiet on Sunday afternoons. Most shops closed early. Grace walked past the closed bakery, the quiet bookstore, the sleeping laundromat. Only the convenience store and the small pharmacy stayed open. She was coming out of the art supply store when she saw him again, the man from the market. He stood across the street talking on a phone. Grace could not hear what he was saying, but his body language suggested anger or stress. He gestured with his free hand, his expression tight. Grace pretended to look in a shop window while watching his reflection in the glass. The man finished his call and walked toward the harbor. On impulse, Grace followed at a distance. She felt foolish doing it. What was she? A spy? A detective? She was a 67-year-old woman who painted pictures. But something in her gut said this man was trouble, and Grace had learned long ago to trust her instincts. The man walked purposefully toward the old industrial area. Grace kept back, using parked cars and buildings for cover. It felt strange to use skills she had not practiced in decades, how to follow without being seen, how to move through spaces while remaining unnoticed. She had done this in Kabul, in Baghdad, in Damascus. Getting close enough to photograph without being detected required these skills. The man entered the old processing plant through a side door that should have been locked. Grace waited, hidden behind a rusted dumpster. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No one came out. She moved closer, careful to stay out of sight. The building looked abandoned as always, but now she noticed things. The side door, though old and painted shut, had fresh scratches around the lock. Boot prints in the mud near the entrance. Multiple people coming and going recently. And, she looked up, cameras. Small security cameras mounted under the eaves, new and expensive looking. No abandoned building needed security cameras. Grace's heart beat faster. She took mental notes, cataloging everything she saw. Then she heard voices inside, muffled but angry. She could not make out words, but the tone was clear. An argument. Maybe 2 men, possibly 3. She needed to leave before someone came out and saw her. Grace backed away carefully, retracing her steps back toward town. Her hands shook slightly. She had not felt this kind of adrenaline in years. That evening, Grace sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and tried to think logically. What had she actually seen? A man who looked suspicious. A building with new security cameras. Voices inside. Nothing concrete. Nothing that proved anything illegal. Maybe the building had been sold and new owners were renovating. Maybe that man was a contractor. Maybe she was an old woman letting her imagination run wild. But Grace knew better. Her instincts had kept her alive in war zones. Something was wrong here. Over the next week, Grace began watching more carefully. She changed her evening walks, sometimes going toward the harbor area, staying out of sight, observing. She saw patterns emerging. The old processing plant had activity at night. Not every night, but several times a week. Cars arrived late, after 11 p.m., sometimes a van. People went inside, but she never saw them clearly, always hooded, always careful. Lights showed briefly in windows, then went dark. By morning, everything looked abandoned again. Grace started keeping notes, dates, times, vehicle descriptions. She felt like she was working again, documenting a story. But this time, she had no camera. The thought of picking one up still made her chest tight with anxiety. On Thursday evening, Grace was in town having dinner at Martinez's restaurant when she overheard something. She sat alone at a corner table, eating fish tacos and reading a book, when the conversation at the next table caught her attention. "I'm telling you, she just disappeared," a woman said. Nicole would never just leave without telling anyone. "Maybe she went to visit family?" her companion suggested. "No, I called her sister in Portland." She hasn't heard from Nicole in 2 weeks, and her apartment. Landlord says she left everything. Clothes, furniture, everything. Who does that? "Did you file a missing person report?" "Yes, but the police don't seem concerned. They said she's an adult, probably just wanted a fresh start somewhere." Grace listened carefully while pretending to read. She knew Nicole vaguely, a young woman who worked at the coffee shop. Quiet, pleasant. Grace had chatted with her a few times about art. Nicole had mentioned wanting to go to art school someday. "It's not just Nicole," the woman continued. "Remember that guy who worked at the marina? Carlos? He disappeared last month. And that woman, what was her name? Emma? She vanished in January. People move away all the time, Jennifer. Not like this. Not leaving everything behind." After dinner, Grace walked home slowly, thinking. 3 people missing. Maybe 4 if she counted another case she had heard mentioned in the grocery store last week. Seaview was a small town. People did move away, but this seemed unusual. That night, Grace could not sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with her notebook, writing down everything she knew: the suspicious man, the activity at the old plant, the missing people. Separately, these things meant nothing. Together, they formed a troubling picture. She thought about going to the police, but what would she say? "I've been spying on an abandoned building, and I think something bad is happening." They would dismiss her as a bored old woman with too much imagination. No, she needed more information, real evidence, and for evidence, she needed photographs. The thought made her stomach clench. She had not touched a camera in 25 years, could not even look at her old photography books without feeling sick. But people might be in danger. If her suspicions were correct, something very serious was happening in her quiet town. Grace went to her bedroom closet and pulled out a box from the back, behind her winter clothes. Inside were a few items from her old life, awards she never displayed, some press credentials, a hard drive with her old photos that she could not bear to delete but never looked at. At the bottom, wrapped in a soft cloth, was her old backup camera. A Canon 5D, not her primary camera, but one she had kept as emergency equipment. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped it. The black metal body felt familiar and foreign at once. Memories flooded back. Dusty streets, frightened faces, Sarah laughing as they reviewed their shots at the end of a long day. Sarah teaching her how to find the light even in darkness. Grace set the camera on the table and stared at it. Could she do this? Could she push past the trauma and use this tool again? She thought about Nicole from the coffee shop, about Carlos and Emma, about whoever else might be in danger. She thought about all the people she had photographed in war zones, suffering and afraid, needing the world to see and know their stories. With shaking hands, Grace picked up the camera and turned it on. The battery was long dead, of course. She would need to charge it, maybe buy a new battery and memory cards. The thought of going into a camera store made her anxious, but she could order supplies online. Tomorrow, she would start preparing. She would face her fears because staying silent was not an option. Grace ordered camera supplies online, paying extra for fast shipping. A new battery, memory cards, and a telephoto lens arrived within 3 days. Each time she handled the equipment, her chest tightened, but she pushed through the discomfort. She started slowly, taking pictures of her garden first, just clicking the shutter, hearing that familiar sound, seeing the image appear on the screen. Her hands shook for the first few shots, but gradually steadied. The camera remembered her fingers even if her mind resisted. Flowers, the ocean from her deck, a bird on the fence. Simple subjects, nothing traumatic. She did not look at the photos yet. That felt like too much too soon. Just the act of taking pictures was enough for now. On Saturday, Grace brought the camera on her morning walk. She photographed the sunrise, the waves, boats in the harbor. People smiled at her, pleased to see her taking photos. "Getting back into photography?" asked Mrs. Henderson. "Just as a hobby," Grace replied, "helping me see things differently for my paintings." It was a good cover story. No one would question the nice painting lady taking photos for reference. Each day, Grace felt slightly more comfortable with the camera. The anxiety did not disappear, but became manageable. She practiced in different lighting conditions, remembering old techniques. How to capture motion, how to work in low light, how to stay unseen while shooting. A week after ordering the equipment, Grace decided she was ready. On Tuesday night, she dressed in dark clothes, black jeans, a navy jacket, dark sneakers. She felt ridiculous, like a child playing spy. But she had done this before, in much more dangerous places. She could do it again. Grace drove toward the harbor around 10 p.m., parking several blocks away from the old processing plant. She walked the rest of the way, staying in shadows, moving quietly. The camera hung around her neck, hidden under her jacket. The night was cloudy, little moonlight. Perfect for not being seen, terrible for photography. But Grace had shot in worse conditions. She found a spot behind an old shipping container about 50 yards from the building, where she had a clear view of the main entrance and side door. She waited. 11 o'clock passed, then midnight. Grace's back ached from crouching. Her knees complained. At 67, surveillance work was harder than it used to be. But she stayed, patient and still. At 12:30, headlights appeared. A white van drove slowly into the lot and parked near the side door. Grace raised her camera, adjusting the settings for night photography. High ISO, wide aperture, slow shutter speed. Her hands were steady now, muscle memory taking over. 2 men got out of the van. The driver was the man she had seen before. Dark jacket, suspicious demeanor. The passenger was older, heavy-set, with a beard. They looked around carefully before opening the van's rear doors. Grace's finger hovered over the shutter button. She took several shots, the camera nearly silent in continuous mode. Through the telephoto lens, she could see clearly even in the dim light. The men pulled someone from the van. A young person, maybe 20s, hands bound, something covering their mouth. The person stumbled, clearly afraid. Grace's blood ran cold. She kept shooting, documenting everything. They brought 2 more people out of the van, both young, both restrained, both terrified. The men forced them toward the building's side door. One of the captives tried to resist, and the bearded man grabbed them roughly, shoving them forward. Grace captured it all. Her heart pounded, but her hands stayed steady. This was what she used to do. Document truth, no matter how difficult. Show the world what was hidden. The group disappeared inside the building. Grace stayed in position, waiting. After about 20 minutes, the two men came out alone, got in the van, and drove away. Grace remained hidden for another 30 minutes, making sure no one else appeared. Then she carefully made her way back to her car, her mind racing. She had evidence now, real proof that something terrible was happening. At home, she uploaded the photos to her computer. Even though it was past 2 a.m., she had to see what she had captured. The images appeared on her screen, clear despite the low light. The van's license plate visible in several shots. The faces of the two men. The terrified captives being forced into the building. Grace's hands covered her mouth. This was real. This was happening in her town, in peaceful Seaview. Human trafficking, right under everyone's noses. She made backups of the photos, one on an external drive, one uploaded to a secure cloud storage. Then she tried to sleep, but nightmares came instead. Not her usual dreams about Syria and Sarah, but new ones about the frightened faces she had seen tonight. The next morning, exhausted and shaken, Grace knew she had to continue. One night of evidence was not enough. She needed to build a complete picture. Who was involved, how many victims, when, and how it operated. The police would need detailed evidence to shut this down completely. Over the following 2 weeks, Grace maintained her surveillance routine. Not every night. She could not manage that physically, and did not want to establish a pattern that someone might notice. 3 or 4 times a week, she positioned herself near the old plant and watched. She learned the operation's rhythm. Activity happened mainly on Tuesday and Friday nights, sometimes Thursday. The same white van appeared often, but occasionally other vehicles came. A dark truck, a blue sedan, once a small moving truck. Different men worked the operation, but the man she first noticed seemed to be in charge. Grace started calling him the boss in her notes. She photographed vehicles and license plates. She photographed the men's faces from multiple angles. She documented the captives being moved in and out, always at night, always frightened. She never saw the captives leave, which meant they were either being held inside or moved out through a different route. Grace also walked around the building during daytime, pretending to be a confused tourist or lost walker, taking casual photos of the exterior, the entrances, the cameras, the general layout. She built a complete visual record. But the work took its toll. She was exhausted all the time, running on little sleep. Her paintings suffered. She made mistakes, lost focus, could not capture the right colors. Daniel at the gallery noticed. "Grace, are you feeling okay?" "You seem tired." "Just not sleeping well," she said, which was true. Getting older, you know. She also struggled with the psychological weight of what she was seeing. These were people being held against their will, probably being trafficked, possibly suffering terribly. Every night she did not call the police felt like a betrayal, but she kept telling herself she needed more evidence to make sure the entire operation was exposed, not just 1 or 2 people arrested while the network continued. One Friday night, 3 weeks into her surveillance, something different happened. Grace was in her usual position behind the shipping container when she heard voices nearby. 2 men approached, not from the building, but from the other direction, walking along the fence line. They were close, too close. Grace pressed herself against the container, barely breathing. The men stopped about 20 feet away, lighting cigarettes. "How many this time?" one asked. 6. All young, all healthy. Should bring good money. "When does the ship arrive?" "Saturday night. We load them at 11, ship leaves at midnight. Boss wants everyone out of town by Sunday morning." "What about that old building?" "They want us to clean it out?" "Yeah, after this shipment. Too risky to keep using it. Someone's been asking questions around town." Grace's blood turned to ice. They knew someone was suspicious. Had they seen her? Did they know about her surveillance? The men finished their cigarettes and walked toward the building. Grace waited until they were inside, then moved quickly and quietly back to her car. Her heart raced. She had what she needed now: confirmation of what was happening and a timeline. A ship was coming tomorrow night. She had less than 24 hours to act. At home, Grace worked through the night, organizing all her evidence: hundreds of photos, detailed notes, dates, times, license plates, physical descriptions. She created a clear timeline of events. Then she wrote a comprehensive report explaining everything she had observed and documented. As dawn broke, Grace looked at her completed file. It was time to go to the police. She had enough evidence now. She had to trust that it would be enough to save those people and stop this operation. But there was a problem. If she gave this to the local police, what if someone in the department was involved? Small-town corruption was not uncommon. If the wrong person saw her evidence first, the criminals would be warned and disappear, taking their victims with them. Grace needed to be smart about this. She needed to go higher up the chain, to someone she could trust completely. Grace spent Saturday morning making phone calls and gathering information. She started with the state police headquarters, explaining she had evidence of a serious crime in Seaview and needed to speak with someone from their investigative division. After being transferred multiple times, she finally connected with Detective Sarah Morales from the State Bureau of Investigation. "This is Detective Morales. How can I help you?" Grace took a breath. "My name is Grace Turner. I live in Seaview, and I have evidence of a human trafficking operation running out of our town. I've been documenting it for the past 3 weeks." There was a pause. "Human trafficking? That's a serious allegation. What kind of evidence do you have?" "Photographs, detailed surveillance notes, license plate numbers. I know when the next shipment is leaving, tonight at 11 p.m. They're loading victims onto a ship at midnight." "Ms. Turner, I need you to come to our office immediately. Can you drive to the State Police Barracks in Westbrook?" "That's 2 hours away. If I wait that long, it might be too late. The people I overheard said they're cleaning out the operation after tonight. All evidence will disappear." "I understand your concern, but I need to see what you have before we can act. Can you send the materials electronically? I can email you everything right now. Then I'll drive to meet you. But please, Detective Morales, these people are in danger. Every hour matters. Send me what you have. I'll review it immediately. If it's as serious as you say, we'll mobilize a team." Grace hung up and immediately emailed her entire file: all photos, all notes, her detailed report. Then she grabbed her car keys. The drive to Westbrook would take 2 hours. She prayed it would not be too late. Halfway through the drive, Grace's phone rang. Detective Morales. "Ms. Turner, I've reviewed your materials. This is extraordinary evidence. How did you gather all this?" "I used to be a photographer. I know how to document things." "That's an understatement. These photos are professional quality, and your notes are more detailed than most trained investigators manage." "Ms. Turner, what did you do before you retired?" Grace hesitated. "I was a photographer. That's all." "What kind of photographer? Does it matter?" "What matters is those people being held in that building." "You're right. I apologize. I've already called my supervisor. We're assembling a tactical team. Can you meet us at the Seaview Police Station in 3 hours? We'll coordinate with local law enforcement for the raid." "Wait, local police? What if someone there is involved?" "That's good thinking. We've had no indication of corruption in Seaview, but we'll be careful. The local police chief is Frank Warren. Do you know him?" Grace thought about Chief Warren, a man in his 50s who had led the Seaview Police for 15 years. She knew him from town events, had painted a portrait of his daughter as a wedding gift. He seemed honest, dedicated to the community. I know him. I trust him. Good. He'll be briefed separately, and we'll make sure no one leaks information before the operation. Ms. Turner, you did the right thing bringing this to us. What you've documented here, it's going to save lives. Grace felt relief wash over her, followed immediately by anxiety. Detective, I need to know. When you raid the building, you'll get the victims out safely? You won't just arrest the criminals? Our first priority is always the victim's safety. We have specialists trained for these situations. I promise you, we'll do everything we can to protect them. 3 hours later, Grace sat in a conference room at the Seaview Police Station. Present were Detective Morales, Chief Warren, 2 other state investigators, and a tactical team commander. Grace's photos were displayed on a large screen. Chief Warren looked shocked. This is happening here? In Seaview? I can't believe it. Believe it, said Detective Morales. Ms. Turner has documented a significant trafficking operation. Based on the overheard conversation, they're moving 6 victims tonight and then abandoning this location. The tactical commander, a serious woman named Lieutenant Chen, studied the photos. Ms. Turner, these images of the building exterior, you have multiple angles showing all entrances? Yes, 3 main entrances, the side door they use most often, the main front doors which appear sealed, and a loading dock in the back. There are also several windows, though most are boarded up or broken. Security cameras? 6 that I identified. Here, here, and here. Grace pointed to the photos. All appear to be motion activated. They're monitored remotely. I saw one of the men checking a phone that showed camera feeds. Lieutenant Chen nodded approvingly. You've done our advance work for us. This is excellent intelligence. Ms. Turner, said Detective Morales, we need you to tell us everything you heard in that conversation. Exact words if you remember them. Grace recited the conversation, word for word. Her memory for detail had always been exceptional, necessary for a war photographer who often could not take notes in dangerous situations. They said someone's been asking questions, Chief Warren noted. Do you think they made you? I don't know. I was very careful, but it's possible. They might have just heard general rumors, small towns talk. True? Okay, here's the plan, said Lieutenant Chen. We hit the building at 10:30 tonight, before the ship arrives and before they start moving victims. Element of surprise is crucial. Ms. Turner, you'll stay here with Chief Warren during the operation. No, Grace said firmly. I'm coming with you. Everyone stared at her. Detective Morales spoke gently. Ms. Turner, this is a law enforcement operation. Civilians can't participate. I'm not asking to go in with the tactical team, but I know that building better than anyone. I've studied it for weeks. If something goes wrong, if you need information about the layout, I need to be there. She has a point, said Chief Warren. Grace knows things we don't. Lieutenant Chen considered. You stay in a command vehicle behind the perimeter. You don't approach the building under any circumstances. Agreed? Agreed. The team spent the next several hours planning the raid. Grace provided every detail she could remember. The afternoon stretched into evening. Grace ate a sandwich someone brought but could not taste it. Her stomach churned with anxiety. At 9:30 p.m., the operation began moving into position. Grace rode in a van with Detective Morales and Chief Warren, parking 3 blocks from the old plant. The tactical teams positioned around the building, invisible in the darkness. Grace watched through binoculars from the van. She could see the building, dark and still. No activity yet. The white van had not arrived. Command, this is Team 1. In position, a voice crackled over the radio. Team 2 in position. Team 3 in position. One by one, the teams confirmed they were ready. The ship was scheduled to arrive at the harbor in 90 minutes. The criminals would arrive soon to prepare. At 10:15, lights appeared. The white van, right on schedule. Grace's heart pounded. "Targets arriving," reported Team 1. "Two individuals exiting vehicle." Through the binoculars, Grace saw the boss and another man. They opened the side door and went inside. "Wait for it!" Lieutenant Chen's voice came over the radio. "Let them get settled. We want as many subjects inside as possible before we move." 10 minutes passed. A car arrived, the blue sedan Grace had photographed before. 2 more men went inside. "4 subjects now inside," reported Team 2. "Any sign of victims?" Lieutenant Chen asked. "Negative. Wait, interior lights just came on in the east section." Grace knew that section. She had seen lights there on several surveillance nights. That must be where the victims were held. "All teams, this is command. Prepare to execute on my mark." Lieutenant Chen's voice was calm and controlled. "Mark in 30 seconds." Grace held her breath. This was it. 25 years after putting down her camera in Syria, she was back in a situation where seconds mattered, where lives hung in the balance. "Mark, go, go, go!" The tactical teams moved with precision. Grace saw dark figures rushing the building from multiple angles. There was a loud crack as they breached the doors. "State police! Everyone on the ground!" Shouting, confusion. Grace strained to see through the binoculars, but the scene was chaotic. Flashlights cut through the darkness. More shouting. "Team 1, 4 suspects secured. Team 2, searching for victims. Team 3, clear in the west section." Minutes felt like hours. Grace's hands gripped the binoculars so tightly they ached. "Team 2, we've got them. 6 victims, all alive, all need medical attention." Grace felt tears on her cheeks. They were alive. They were safe. "Ambulances moving in," Chief Warren said into his radio. "EMS, you're clear to approach." Emergency vehicles that had been staged nearby rolled forward. Grace watched as EMTs rushed into the building. Soon they emerged with people on stretchers, the victims, wrapped in blankets, being loaded into ambulances. "All suspects in custody," Lieutenant Chen reported. "Building secure." "Scene is safe." Detective Morales turned to Grace. "You did it. You saved them." Grace could not speak. She just watched as the ambulances drove away, carrying 6 people who had been trapped, who had been headed for something terrible, who were now going to a hospital instead. Over the next hour, the scene became more organized. More police arrived. The suspects were loaded into separate vehicles. Investigators entered the building to process the crime scene. Chief Warren approached Grace. "Those people in the ambulances, they're safe because of you. You know that, right?" "I just took pictures," Grace said quietly. "You did a lot more than that. Grace, I've known you for how many years? 15? 20? And I never knew you had these skills. Where did you learn to conduct surveillance like that? Your documentation is better than most of my officers manage." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I used to be a photographer. A different kind of photographer, in different places." Chief Warren studied her face. "What kind of places?" "War zones, conflict areas. I documented suffering and injustice. That's what I did before I came to Seaview." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Grace Turner, wait. Grace Turner, the war photographer? I remember reading about you years ago. You won awards. Your photos were in every major publication." "That was a long time ago. Another life." "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" "Because I came here to forget. Because I watched my best friend die, and I couldn't do that work anymore. Because I needed peace." Chief Warren nodded slowly. "But when you saw people in danger, you couldn't stay silent." "No, I couldn't." Detective Morales joined them. "Ms. Turner, We need you to provide a formal statement. Also, the FBI will want to talk to you. This trafficking operation likely extends beyond Seaview. Are you willing to testify if this goes to trial? Yes, whatever you need. There's something else, Detective Morales said. The victims, they're frightened, traumatized. They'll need to be interviewed, but it has to be done carefully. You have experience documenting trauma survivors, don't you? From your photography work? Grace understood what she was really asking. You want me to help with the victims? Not officially. We have trauma counselors, advocates, but you understand what they're going through in a way most people don't. If you're willing, we could use your insight. Grace looked at the old processing plant, lit up now with portable lights as investigators worked inside. She thought about the young faces she had photographed being forced inside, terrified and helpless. She thought about all the faces she had photographed over the years in war zones, people suffering, people surviving, people holding on to hope in terrible circumstances. I'll help however I can, she said. Chapter 5. Faces of Courage. Grace did not sleep that night. After giving her statement at the police station, she returned home as dawn broke. Her cottage felt too quiet, too empty. She made tea and sat on her deck watching the sunrise, trying to process everything that had happened. The local news was already covering the story. Major human trafficking operation shut down in Seaview. The TV showed the old processing plant surrounded by police vehicles, though details were limited. The reporters did not mention Grace's involvement, which was fine with her. By mid-morning, her phone started ringing. Daniel from the gallery. Grace? Did you see the news? I can't believe this was happening here. Mrs. Henderson. Dear, the whole town is talking about it. Right here in Seaview. Who would have thought? The Martinez family. Friends from her art class. Everyone wanted to talk about the shocking discovery. Grace answered briefly, saying she was as surprised as everyone else. Only Chief Warren knew her role, along with the state investigators. They had agreed to keep her involvement quiet for now, both for her privacy and for safety. The investigation was ongoing, and some suspects remained at large. On Sunday afternoon, Detective Morales called. Ms. Turner, are you available to come to the hospital? The victims are stable and ready to talk. We have interpreters and counselors present. Your presence might help. Grace drove to County General Hospital. Detective Morales met her in the lobby and led her to a private wing where the 6 victims were being held under protective custody. 5 are from Central America, Morales explained. 1 is from Eastern Europe, ages 19 to 25. They were told they were getting legitimate jobs in America, paid to travel here. Then their documents were taken and they were held captive. They've been moved through 3 different locations over the past 2 months. How long were they in Seaview? Just a week. This was a transit point. They would have been moved to another location tonight, probably to work in forced labor or worse. Morales led Grace to a conference room where a young woman sat with an interpreter and a victim advocate. The woman looked exhausted, frightened, but there was steel in her eyes. This is Maria, said the interpreter. She's willing to talk, but she's understandably scared. Grace sat down across from Maria. She did not pull out a notebook or camera. She just looked at Maria with the same gaze she had used in countless interviews. Present, compassionate, patient. Hello, Maria. My name is Grace. I'm not a police officer. I'm just someone who wants to help. The interpreter translated. Maria studied Grace's face, then spoke in Spanish. She asks why you want to help, the interpreter said. Because no one should have to experience what you experienced. Because you deserved better. Because your story matters. As the interpreter translated, Maria's expression softened slightly. She began to talk, slowly at first, then faster. Grace listened as Maria's story emerged. The promise of a restaurant job in America, the excitement of the opportunity, the journey north, the moment everything changed when men took her passport and phone. The fear of the past 2 months, never knowing what would happen next. Grace listened without interrupting. She had learned this skill long ago. How to be present for someone's trauma without inserting herself into it. How to witness without judgment. How to hold space for difficult truths. When Maria finished, she was crying. Grace reached across the table and took her hand. "You were very brave," Grace said. "You survived." That takes incredible strength. Maria squeezed Grace's hand and whispered something. "She says thank you," the interpreter translated. "She says you have kind eyes." Over the next 2 days, Grace spent hours at the hospital, meeting with all 6 victims. Each had a different story, but common threads ran through them. Promises of opportunity, manipulation, captivity, fear. Each was traumatized but also resilient, determined to survive. Grace helped the investigators understand how to approach the interviews without re-traumatizing the victims. She suggested ways to phrase questions, recommended breaks when someone became overwhelmed, identified when someone needed more support. "You're good at this," said Detective Morales. "Have you done victim advocacy before?" "Not formally, but I spent years interviewing people in traumatic situations. You learn how to listen, how to build trust." On Tuesday, a week after the raid, Detective Morales asked Grace to meet her at a coffee shop in town. Grace ordered tea, and they sat by the window. "The FBI wants to talk to you," Morales said. "This trafficking network is bigger than we thought. It operates in 6 states, moving people through a series of safe houses and transit points. Seaview was just one piece. How many people have they trafficked?" "We don't know yet. Dozens, maybe more. Your evidence from Seaview is helping us map the entire operation. The photos you took, we've identified 3 of the men as known criminals with warrants in other states." "What about the victims? What happens to them now?" "They'll be placed in a protective program. They'll receive support services, counseling, legal assistance. Eventually, they'll have the option to return home or stay in the U.S. with special visas for trafficking victims. Can I stay in contact with them? I'd like to help if I can. That's up to them, but I'm sure they'd appreciate it. Maria especially has been asking about you. She wants to thank you properly." Grace wrapped her hands around her teacup. "She doesn't need to thank me. I just did what anyone would do." "No, Grace. Most people would have looked away. Most people would have convinced themselves it wasn't their business. You risked your safety to help people you didn't even know. I've seen too much suffering in my life to ignore it when I see it again." Detective Morales hesitated, then said, "Chief Warren told me about your background. The war photography. I looked you up. Your work is remarkable. The photo from Iraq with the girl and the white flag, that was you?" Grace nodded. That photograph had won her a major award, back when awards mattered to her. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, holding a white flag made from a torn sheet, standing in rubble while soldiers approached. The image had appeared on front pages worldwide. "That photo helped change policy," Morales said. "It showed people what war really looked like, what it did to civilians. Your work mattered. My work also got people killed. It got my friend killed. It traumatized me so badly I couldn't take pictures for 25 years. But you picked up a camera again when it mattered. That must have been terrifying." "It was. It still is. Every time I hold a camera, I remember that day. The explosion, Sarah's scream, the sound of my camera hitting the ground, But those people in that building needed help more than I needed to avoid my fears. That's courage, Grace. Real courage. Grace shook her head. Courage is those 6 people who survived captivity and are brave enough to tell their stories. Courage is every person who keeps going despite trauma. I just took pictures. You did a lot more than that, and you know it. The conversation shifted to practical matters. The ongoing investigation, the FBI interviews Grace would need to do, the possibility of trial testimony. Grace agreed to everything. This had started as her mission. She would see it through. Over the following weeks, life in Seaview slowly returned to normal, though the town buzzed with talk about the trafficking operation. People were shocked that something so terrible had been happening in their peaceful community. There was a lot of discussion about being more vigilant, watching for warning signs. Grace's involvement remained mostly unknown. The official story credited an alert citizen with providing the initial tip. Chief Warren and Detective Morales protected her privacy as much as possible. But word started to leak out, as it always does in small towns. First, people learned that Grace had been involved in some way. Then, somehow, information about her past career surfaced. Someone found her old photos online, made connections, started sharing information. One morning, Grace woke to find a reporter waiting outside her cottage. She refused to comment and called Chief Warren, who sent an officer to move the reporter along. But more came. Her phone rang constantly. People showed up at the gallery. Daniel pulled her aside. Grace, I had 3 different journalists here yesterday asking about you. They say you used to be a famous war photographer. Is that true? Grace sighed. Her peaceful anonymity was over. Yes, it's true. Long ago. Why didn't you ever tell me? Tell any of us? Because that person died in Syria 25 years ago. I came here to be someone else, someone quieter, someone safer. But you weren't someone else, were you? You were always you. You just paused. Grace thought about that. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe you could not escape who you truly were no matter how hard you tried. The town's reaction surprised her. Instead of feeling betrayed that she had hidden her past, people seemed proud. Did you know we have a famous photographer living here? Became a common refrain. People asked to see her old work, wanted to hear stories about her career. Grace found it overwhelming and uncomfortable. She had come to Seaview to disappear, not to be celebrated. She did not want to be Grace Turner, award-winning photojournalist. She just wanted to be Grace who painted seascapes. But she could not unring the bell. Her past and present had merged. She would have to find a way to live with both. One evening, about 3 weeks after the raid, Grace sat on her deck with Chief Warren. He had become a friend during this ordeal, someone who understood what she had done and why. How are you holding up? He asked. Tired? Overwhelmed? I'm not used to all this attention. The reporters will get bored eventually. Some other story will capture their interest. I know, but it's not just the reporters. It's seeing myself through everyone's eyes now. They look at me differently. I'm not just Grace the painting lady anymore. Is that such a bad thing? I don't know. I liked being just Grace the painting lady. Warren was quiet for a moment watching the sunset. Then he said, You know, when I became police chief 15 years ago, I thought I understood what protecting people meant. Stop crimes, arrest bad guys, keep the peace. But what you did, that was protection at a different level. You saw something wrong and you didn't just report it. You built a case, documented it thoroughly, made sure we could act effectively. You protected 6 people from something terrible. I just used old skills. You used skills you were trying to forget because you'd been traumatized. That's different. That's choosing to face your demons to help other people. Grace thought about the nightmares she still had, about the moments of panic when handling the camera, about the way her chest tightened whenever she thought too long about Syria. The demons are still there, she said quietly. Of course they are. Trauma doesn't just disappear, but you're not letting them control you anymore. Maybe that was progress. Maybe that was healing. A month after the raid, Grace received a letter from Maria, written in careful English with help from her advocate. Dear Grace, I am still in the hospital program but getting stronger every day. The counselors are very kind. I am learning English better. I think about you often and what you did for us. You saved my life, not just from those bad men, but you saved my hope. When I was trapped, I thought no one cared, no one would help. But you saw us. You cared enough to do something difficult and dangerous. You proved that good people exist. I want to study to be a nurse. I want to help people like you helped me. I don't know if I will stay in America or go home to Honduras someday, but I know I will do something good with my life. Because you showed me that one person can make a difference. Thank you for your kind eyes and brave heart. Mariak. Grace read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She had received thank you letters before, from people she had photographed, from families who said her images had helped bring attention to their suffering. But this was different. This was not about documenting suffering. This was about preventing it, stopping it, saving actual lives. She wrote back to Maria, encouraging her nursing dream, promising to stay in touch. Over the following months, Grace maintained contact with several of the victims. She attended their court hearings when they gave testimony against the traffickers. She celebrated when they achieved small victories, finding jobs, enrolling in classes, rebuilding their lives. The FBI investigation expanded. Using Grace's evidence and the testimony of the 6 victims, they identified and arrested 17 people across 6 states. The trafficking network collapsed. Dozens more victims were freed. Grace's photographs appeared in court documents, in FBI presentations, in news coverage of the arrests. Her identity as the source of the evidence could not be hidden anymore. A major newspaper published a feature article. War photographer comes out of retirement to stop trafficking ring. It included some of her old photos alongside new ones from the Seaview case. Grace hated the attention, but she understood it served a purpose. The story brought awareness to human trafficking issues. It showed people how to recognize warning signs. It encouraged other people to speak up when they saw something wrong. Daniel at the gallery suggested an idea. Grace, what if you did an exhibition? Not just your seascapes, but a retrospective of your career. Show people both sides of your work, the war photography and the peaceful paintings. Show how you've evolved. Grace's first instinct was to refuse. She did not want to revisit those old photographs, did not want to display that trauma publicly. But then she thought about Maria and the other victims. She thought about all the people she had photographed over the years, people who had trusted her to tell their stories. What if we made it a fundraiser? Grace said slowly. For organizations that fight human trafficking and help survivors? Daniel's face lit up. That's perfect. We could do a whole event, exhibition, auction, talks about the issue. Grace, this could really make a difference. It took Grace 2 months to prepare. She went through her old photography archives for the first time in 25 years. Each image brought back memories, some painful, some beautiful, all powerful. She selected carefully, choosing photos that told important stories without exploiting the subjects. She also created new paintings inspired by her recent experience. One showed the old processing plant at night, dark and ominous. Another depicted sunrise over the ocean, symbolizing hope and new beginnings. A third was an abstract piece with broken chains and light breaking through darkness. The exhibition opened on a Friday evening in November, exactly 6 months after the raid. The gallery was packed. People from all over the region came: journalists, art collectors, human rights activists, and local residents curious about Grace's work. Grace stood nervously near the entrance as people viewed her photographs. She watched their faces as they took in images of war, displacement, suffering, and survival. She saw tears, shock, contemplation, anger, compassion. Maria came to the opening, along with two other victims from the Seaview case. They had been given permission to attend, accompanied by their advocates. When Maria saw Grace, she crossed the room and embraced her. "Your photos are powerful," Maria said in improving English. "They show truth." "So do you," Grace replied. "You're here, standing tall, moving forward. You're the powerful one." The event raised over $50,000 for anti-trafficking organizations. The local newspaper wrote about it. The gallery received requests to host the exhibition at other venues. Grace found herself being asked to speak at events, to share her story, to inspire others to take action against injustice. It was exhausting and uncomfortable and pushed her far outside her comfort zone. But it also felt important, meaningful. Like her life had come full circle in a way she never expected. One evening, after a particularly long day of interviews and meetings, Grace sat on her deck with her camera beside her. She picked it up without thinking, no longer afraid of it. The trauma was still there. She did not think it would ever fully disappear, but it no longer controlled her. She photographed the sunset, the waves, a seagull flying past, simple things, beautiful things. Then she turned the camera toward town, toward the lights coming on as evening fell, toward the old processing plant that now stood empty, awaiting demolition. Grace thought about the past 6 months, how a simple observation had led to surveillance, which led to evidence, which led to rescue, which led to healing, not just for the victims, but for herself. She thought about Sarah, her friend who died in Syria. Sarah had always said their work mattered, that documenting truth was worth the risks. "We show the world what it needs to see," Sarah used to say, "even when it's hard to look." Grace had not been able to show the world anything for 25 years, but she had found her way back to witnessing, to documenting, to using her skills for something that mattered. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was healing. The phone rang. Detective Morales. "Grace, I have good news. The last suspect was arrested this morning in Texas. Everyone involved in the trafficking network is now in custody. This is over." "That's wonderful," Grace said, feeling a weight lift from her chest. "There's more. The FBI wants to give you a civilian commendation for your work on this case. The ceremony is next month in Washington, D.C. "I don't need a commendation. I know you don't need it. But maybe accept it anyway? Not for you, but for what it represents. Recognition that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. That courage comes in many forms." Grace thought about Maria wanting to become a nurse, about Chief Warren saying she had shown people what protection really meant, about her own journey from trauma to action. "Okay," she said. "I'll accept it." After hanging up, Grace sat watching the stars come out. The ocean whispered against the shore. Her cottage stood solid and safe behind her. Seaview continued its quiet existence around her, though it was a little less naive now, a little more aware that darkness could hide anywhere. But light could shine anywhere, too. One person with courage could make a difference. Grace had learned that long ago in war zones, forgotten it in her trauma, and rediscovered it in her own backyard. She was not the same person who arrived in Seaview 25 years ago. broken and seeking peace. She was not the same person who had been 6 months ago either, hiding from her past and pretending to be someone simple and ordinary. She was something new, something that integrated all of her: the war photographer, the trauma survivor, the painter, the investigator, the witness. All of those pieces were Grace Turner. Not separate lives, but one life with many chapters. And her story was not over yet. Winter came to Seaview, bringing cold winds and rough seas. Grace continued her routines, painting, working at the gallery, teaching art classes, but now with an added dimension. She had become an advocate, using her platform to speak about human trafficking awareness. Schools invited her to talk to students about being vigilant, watching out for each other. Community groups asked her to lead discussions about recognizing warning signs. The police department wanted her to help train officers in documentation and evidence gathering. Grace accepted some invitations, declined others. She was learning to balance her need for privacy with her responsibility to use her experience for good. It was a delicate balance, one she navigated day by day. In December, she traveled to Washington, D.C. for the FBI commendation ceremony. Maria and the other victims were there, also being recognized for their courage in testifying. Grace stood with them on stage as the FBI director praised their bravery. "These individuals," the director said, "represent the best of what it means to be part of a community. They saw injustice and did not look away. They faced danger to protect others. They reminded us that heroism is not just the work of law enforcement. It's the work of conscientious citizens who care about their neighbors." The medal felt heavy in Grace's hand. She thought about all the awards she had won for her photography: prestigious prizes from journalism organizations, recognition from human rights groups. Those had once mattered enormously to her. This mattered more. After the ceremony, Grace had lunch with Maria and her advocate. Maria was enrolled in community college now, taking prerequisites for nursing school. She looked healthier, stronger, more confident. "I am writing my story," Maria told Grace. "My English teacher says I should publish it, help other people understand what trafficking victims experience. That's brave of you. Are you ready to share something so personal?" "I am ready to help others. If my story can save one person, it is worth it. You taught me that. Your photos show difficult things to help people understand. I can do the same with words." Grace felt proud of this young woman who had survived so much and was channeling her experience into helping others. "When you publish it, I'd be honored to read it." "I want you to take my photograph," Maria said, "for the book. Not as a victim, as a survivor, as someone strong." The request touched Grace deeply. "I would be honored." They arranged a photography session for the next time Grace visited the city. It would be the first portrait Grace had taken in decades, the first time photographing a person since Syria. She felt nervous about it, but also ready. Back in Seaview, life continued to evolve. The old processing plant was demolished in January, the lot cleared and sold to a developer who planned to build affordable housing. Grace thought that was fitting, transforming a place of suffering into homes where families could thrive. The trial for the trafficking ringleaders began in February. Grace was called to testify, presenting her photographs and explaining her surveillance process. The defense attorneys tried to discredit her, suggesting she had no authority to conduct investigations, implying she was a vigilante. But the prosecutor turned it around. "Ms. Turner, you're not a police officer. You had no legal obligation to investigate. Why did you do it?" Grace looked at the jury. "Because I saw something wrong and I had skills that could help. I've spent my career documenting injustice. I couldn't ignore it when it appeared in my own community." "Were you afraid?" "Yes, very afraid. But fear of consequences for yourself becomes less important when others are suffering." Her testimony, combined with the victim's statements and the physical evidence, was compelling. The jury convicted all 5 defendants on multiple counts. They received sentences ranging from 20 to 40 years. Grace attended the sentencing hearing. She watched the victims give impact statements, describing how the trafficking had affected them. She saw their strength, their resilience, their determination to move forward. After the sentencing, Detective Morales took Grace to dinner. "You did it," she said. "Those convictions, they don't happen without your evidence. You know that, right? We all did it. The investigators, the prosecutors, the victims who testified. Grace, you need to let yourself take some credit. What you did was extraordinary." Grace was quiet for a moment, then said, "When I was a war photographer, I always struggled with my role. I documented suffering but couldn't stop it. I took pictures of people in pain but couldn't ease their pain. It felt like exploitation sometimes, even though I knew the work was important. But this time was different. This time I didn't just document. I intervened. I stopped something bad from continuing. I saved specific people. For the first time in my career, my witness led directly to rescue. That feels different, better. Maybe this is your new purpose. Not just documenting what's wrong, but actively working to fix it." Grace considered that. Maybe Morales was right. Maybe her skills, observation, documentation, patience, courage, could be used in new ways. Not in war zones, but in her own community and beyond. Spring arrived, bringing renewal. Grace's garden bloomed with daffodils and tulips. The ocean warmed enough for swimming. Tourists began arriving, bringing life and energy to Seaview. Grace taught her Saturday art class to a group of children who now knew her whole story. They asked her about her war photography, about the trafficking case, about being brave. "Was it scary taking those pictures at night?" asked 10-year-old Emma. "Very scary," Grace admitted. "I was afraid the whole time." "But you did it anyway?" "Yes, because sometimes being brave doesn't mean not feeling afraid. It means doing what's right even though you're afraid." "My mom says you're a hero," said another student, Marcus. Grace shook her head. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who paid attention and took action. Anyone can do that." "But most people don't," said Emma wisely. "That's what makes it special." Out of the mouths of children, Grace thought. Maybe they understood better than adults sometimes. In May, Grace received an unexpected visitor. A young man in his 30s knocked on her door, carrying a portfolio. "Miss Turner? My name is James Brennan. I'm Sarah Brennan's nephew." Grace's breath caught. Sarah, her friend who died in Syria 25 years ago. "Please, come in." James sat in her living room, nervous. "I'm a photojournalist, following in Aunt Sarah's footsteps. I wanted to meet you. She talked about you all the time in her letters home. You were her best friend." Tears stung Grace's eyes. She was mine, too. "I'm sorry I never contacted your family after it happened. I couldn't. I was too broken." "I understand." Mom, Sarah's sister, she understood too. She knew you were traumatized. She's followed your career over the years, the paintings, the recent trafficking case. She wanted me to tell you she's proud of you. That Sarah would be proud. Grace couldn't speak for a moment. Finally, she said, "Tell me about yourself, about your work." James showed her his portfolio, powerful images from refugee camps, from climate disasters, from social justice movements. His work had Sarah's compassion, but his own unique voice. "I want to ask you something," James said. "I'm working on a project about photojournalists who experienced trauma in the field. How it affected them, how they coped or didn't cope, whether they continued working or had to stop. Would you be willing to be interviewed? Grace's first instinct was to refuse. But looking at this young man, Sarah's nephew, carrying on her legacy, she reconsidered. Maybe sharing her story could help other people dealing with similar trauma. Yes, she said, I'll do it. They spent the next 3 hours talking. Grace told James about her career, about working with Sarah, about the explosion and its aftermath, about 25 years of healing and hiding, about rediscovering her purpose through the trafficking case. James listened intently, occasionally taking notes, but mostly just present. He had Sarah's gift for making people feel heard. You know, he said finally, Aunt Sarah used to say that photojournalism was about bearing witness, making sure the truth wasn't hidden or forgotten. You did that in war zones for years. Then you did it again in Seaview, in a different way. You're still bearing witness, just in a new form. Grace thought about that. Maybe he was right. Maybe her purpose had always been about seeing what others missed and bringing it into the light. The tool, camera, testimony, advocacy mattered less than the act of witnessing itself. Before James left, he said, There's something I want you to have. He pulled out a small box. Inside was a necklace with a simple pendant, Sarah's press credential from her last assignment, the one she was wearing when she died. Mom kept this all these years. She wants you to have it. She said Sarah would want you to have it. Grace held the small piece of laminated plastic, Sarah's smiling photo looking up at her. All the grief she had pushed down for 25 years rose up. She cried like she hadn't cried since leaving Syria, deep sobs that shook her body. James sat with her, letting her grief flow, understanding it needed to be released. When the tears finally subsided, Grace felt lighter, like something that had been stuck inside her for decades had finally broken free. Thank you, she whispered, for bringing this, for doing this work, for keeping Sarah's spirit alive. Thank you for talking with me. And, Miss Turner, keep bearing witness. The world needs people like you. After James left, Grace sat on her deck with Sarah's press credential in her hands. She thought about the young woman she had been, partnering with Sarah to document the world's suffering. About the broken woman who arrived in Seaview seeking peace. About the person she was now, who had found a way to use her gifts again. She thought about Maria studying to be a nurse, about the other survivors rebuilding their lives, about the trafficking network dismantled because one person noticed and cared. She thought about bearing witness to war, to injustice, to suffering, but also to resilience, to courage, to hope. Grace picked up her camera and photographed the sunset, the ocean, the town spreading along the coast. Then she took a selfie, something she never did, holding Sarah's press credential. She looked at the image. Herself at 67, silver-haired and lined, holding a remnant of her past. Sitting in her present, ready for her future, she sent the photo to James with a message. Still witnessing. Still caring. Still trying to make a difference. Thank you for helping me reconnect with that part of myself. Then she set the camera down and just sat, watching the light change, feeling the breeze, listening to the waves. Grateful for her quiet town, for her small life, for the opportunity to have helped when help was needed. Grace Turner had been many things: daughter, photographer, friend, trauma survivor, painter, investigator, witness. She was all of those things still, integrated now instead of fragmented. She had learned that you cannot escape your past, but you can make peace with it. That trauma might never fully heal, but it does not have to define you. That courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite it. And she had learned that home is not just a place. It's a state of being. She had found home in Seaview 25 years ago when she needed refuge. She had made it again when she chose to act, to care, to risk herself for others. This was home. This was her life. And it was enough. Summer brought changes to Seaview. The town council approved a memorial in the town square, a sculpture representing freedom and hope dedicated to survivors of human trafficking. Grace was asked to speak at the dedication ceremony. She stood before a crowd of several hundred people, residents, visitors, survivors, advocates. The marble sculpture behind her depicted a figure breaking free from chains, arms raised toward the sky. 25 years ago, Grace began, I came to Seaview to hide from the world. I had seen too much suffering, experienced too much trauma. I wanted peace, quiet, anonymity. This town gave me that. You accepted me without questions, without judgment. You let me heal in my own time, in my own way. She paused, looking out at familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson with her dog, Daniel from the gallery, Chief Warren in his uniform, the Martinez family, her art students, people who had become her community. But last year, when I saw something wrong, I couldn't stay hidden. I couldn't prioritize my peace over others' safety. And when I acted, this community supported me. The police took my evidence seriously. You protected my privacy when needed, celebrated my actions when appropriate. You showed me that being part of a community means both receiving support and giving it. She glanced at Maria, who stood near the front with other survivors. The people we honor today showed tremendous courage. They survived captivity, testified despite fear, and are rebuilding their lives with grace and determination. They are the real heroes here. I just took some pictures. A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the crowd. Grace smiled. But if my story has value, it's this. Every person has gifts they can use to help others. Mine happen to be photography skills from a previous career. Yours might be noticing when a neighbor seems in trouble, or having the courage to report something suspicious, or offering kindness to someone who's struggling. We all have something to contribute. Grace looked at the sculpture, the figure reaching toward freedom. In my old work as a war photographer, I tried to give voice to the voiceless, to show suffering that others wanted to ignore. I couldn't save the people I photographed. I could only document their stories and hope the world would care. But here in Seaview, documentation led to rescue. Witness led to action. And that has changed me. It's shown me that my gifts can be used in new ways, that my past experiences have value in unexpected contexts. She took a breath. This memorial represents breaking free from captivity, but it also represents breaking free from fear, from silence, from inaction. It reminds us that we all have a responsibility to watch out for each other, to speak up when something is wrong, to use whatever gifts we have to make our community better and safer. Grace concluded, "Thank you for giving me a home. Thank you for accepting all of me, the parts I shared and the parts I kept hidden. Thank you for showing me that healing isn't about forgetting the past, but about integrating it into who we are and using it for good. And thank you for proving that small towns can do big things when people care." The applause was warm and sustained. Maria came up to hug Grace. Others followed, people thanking her, sharing their own stories of trauma and healing, expressing how her actions had inspired them. Later, at the reception, Grace stood with Chief Warren and Detective Morales, who had driven down for the ceremony. "You've started something here," Morales said. "3 other small towns in the state have reached out to our department asking for training on how to recognize trafficking signs. They all mentioned your case as inspiration." "That's good," Grace said. "The more people who know what to look for, the harder it is for traffickers to operate." We're developing a training program based on your methods, Chief Warren added. How you documented evidence, built your case, approached it systematically. We want to teach other citizens those skills. Grace felt pride mixed with humility. Her actions had created ripples extending far beyond Seaview. But she also felt the weight of responsibility that came with being public about her story. Over the summer, Grace found a new rhythm. She continued painting. That would always be her primary joy. But she also accepted speaking engagements, taught photography workshops focusing on documentary work, and worked with local police on community safety initiatives. She photographed regularly now, without the paralyzing anxiety that had plagued her for so long. Not war zones. She had no desire to return to that kind of danger. But she documented her community, the ocean, daily life in Seaview. She captured the beauty and complexity of ordinary existence. In August, Maria graduated from her medical assistant program and got a job at County General Hospital. Grace attended the small graduation ceremony, watching with maternal pride as Maria received her certificate. "This is just the beginning," Maria told Grace afterward. "2 more years for nursing degree, then maybe more school after that. I want to specialize in helping trauma survivors. You'll be wonderful at that. You understand what they're going through. Because of what happened to me, yes, but also because of you. You showed me how to turn suffering into purpose." Grace thought about that conversation for days. She had not set out to be anyone's mentor or inspiration. She had just done what seemed necessary. But apparently her actions had meaning beyond their immediate impact. In September, James published his article about photojournalists and trauma. Grace's story featured prominently. The piece was thoughtful and nuanced, exploring how trauma affects creative professionals, how some leave the field while others find ways to continue, how healing is not linear, but cyclical. The article generated significant attention. Grace received messages from other photographers who had experienced similar trauma, thanking her for speaking openly about it. She heard from trauma survivors in other fields who found parallels in their own experiences. She heard from young people considering careers in photojournalism who felt better prepared for its challenges after reading about hers. One message particularly moved her. It came from a woman named Linda, who had been a war correspondent in the same era as Grace. Linda had also left the field after a traumatic incident and had been living quietly in rural Montana for 20 years. "Your story gave me permission to forgive myself," Linda wrote. "I've spent 2 decades feeling like I failed, like I was weak for not being able to continue. But reading about your experience, your 25-year journey, your eventual return to photography in a different context, it helped me understand that survival takes many forms. Thank you for being brave enough to share your truth." Grace responded to Linda, and they began corresponding regularly. It felt good to connect with someone who truly understood the specific challenges of their shared profession and the unique trauma it could produce. Fall arrived with its spectacular colors. Grace painted autumn scenes and photographed the changing landscape. She taught her art classes, worked at the gallery, tended her garden. She lived her life. But now it was a life with more dimensions. She was not just Grace the painting lady. She was Grace the photographer, the advocate, the survivor, the mentor, the witness. All of these identities coexisted, sometimes comfortably, sometimes in tension, but always authentically. In October, Grace received an invitation that surprised her. The International Press Association wanted to give her a Lifetime Achievement Award. Not for her recent work, for her entire career, her war photography, and its impact over the decades. "We should have honored you long ago," the letter said, "but we lost track of you after you left the field. Now that you've returned to public life, we want to recognize your contributions to photojournalism, and your demonstration that the core values of our profession, bearing witness, seeking truth, giving voice to the voiceless, can be expressed in many ways. Grace's first impulse was to decline. She had left that world behind for good reasons. But then she thought about Sarah, about all the other photojournalists who had been killed or traumatized doing this work. She thought about young people entering the field who needed to understand both its importance and its costs. She accepted the award. The ceremony was in New York City in November. Grace flew there with Maria, who had become like a daughter to her. They stayed in a hotel overlooking Central Park, and Grace felt strange being in such a big city after so many years in small-town Seaview. The ceremony was elegant. Hundreds of photojournalists, editors, and media professionals gathered to honor various achievements. Grace watched as younger colleagues received awards for current work. She felt both connected to and distant from their world. She had been them once. She understood their passion, their drive, their sense of purpose. When Grace's name was called, she walked to the stage with Maria beside her. She had insisted that Maria share the stage as a representative of all the people whose stories needed telling. "I spent decades photographing war," Grace told the audience. "I documented suffering, injustice, violence, displacement. I believed then and still believe that this work matters, that showing the world what it would rather not see is essential, that bearing witness is a sacred responsibility." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I also learned that this work costs us. It traumatized me so deeply that I could not touch a camera for 25 years. I left the field, left my identity as a photojournalist, and tried to become someone else entirely." Grace looked at Maria. "Then, in my quiet retirement, I witnessed injustice again. And I discovered I had not stopped being a photojournalist. I had just been dormant. The skills remained, the instinct to document remained, the commitment to truth remained. They came back when they were needed." She held up the award. "I accept this not for myself, but for everyone who does this difficult work, for those who continue despite trauma, for those who had to step away to heal, for those who find new ways to use their gifts, and for those, like my friend Sarah Brennan, who lost their lives doing work they believed in." Grace gestured to Maria. "And I accept it on behalf of the people whose stories we tell." Maria survived human trafficking. She's in nursing school now, planning to help other survivors. She's brave enough to let her story be known if it might help others. She represents everyone who trusts us to tell their truth, who shares their trauma in hopes of creating change. We owe them our best work, our integrity, and our commitment to not just documenting suffering, but working to end it. The applause was thunderous. Grace and Maria left the stage together, two survivors in different ways, two people who had found purpose in their pain. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached Grace. Old colleagues she had not seen in decades, young photographers who had studied her work in school, editors who remembered her images. Many shared their own stories of trauma and healing. Grace listened to each one, understanding now that speaking openly about these experiences helped break the isolation that trauma creates. An older man with a weathered face approached last. "Grace Turner, I'm David Morrison. I worked with Sarah Brennan after you left. I was with her on her final assignment." Grace's breath caught. "You were there? When she died?" "I was 50 feet away when the explosion happened. I survived without major injuries, like you. I've carried guilt about that for 25 years. Why did I survive when Sarah didn't? Why did you and I live while she died?" "Survivor's guilt," Grace said quietly. "I understand it well. Your speech tonight, it helped me understand something. We honor the dead not by feeling guilty that we survived, but by living fully, by using our survival for good. Sarah would want that for us. They talked for a long time, two people connected by shared loss, finally able to process it together. David still worked as a photojournalist, covering humanitarian crises. Sarah's death didn't break me, he said. It made me more determined to do this work right, to honor the people I photograph, to make sure their stories matter. Grace realized that people responded to trauma in different ways. Some, like her, needed to step away. Others, like David, needed to continue. Neither response was wrong. Both were survival strategies. Flying back to Seaview, Grace felt complete in a way she had not felt in 25 years. She had faced her past, honored her friend's memory, connected with her professional community, and claimed her full identity. All of it, not just the parts that felt safe. That was amazing, Maria said beside her. You are so brave. We're both brave, Grace replied. We're both survivors. We both turned our pain into purpose. I want to be like you when I'm older. Strong, confident, making a difference. You already are those things. You're 25 years old, and you're already changing the world one patient at a time. By the time you're my age, you'll have helped hundreds of people. Maria smiled. Maybe. But I learned from the best. They flew home to Seaview, to the small coastal town that had given Grace sanctuary, and then called her to action. As the plane descended, Grace looked out the window at the familiar coastline, the lighthouse, the harbor, the town spread along the shore. Home. Not because it was where she hid, but because it was where she belonged, where she was known and loved, where she had found her way back to herself. Winter settled into Seaview, quiet and contemplative. Grace used the slower season to work on a project that had been growing in her mind, a book combining her war photographs with her recent work documenting the trafficking case, along with essays about witness, trauma, and healing. She worked with a publisher who specialized in photo books with social impact. Together, they crafted a narrative that was both personal and universal, specific to her experience, but relevant to anyone dealing with trauma and recovery. The book, titled Bearing Witness, A Photographer's Journey from War Zones to Home, would be published the following fall. Grace approached it with mixed feelings. Exposing so much of herself felt vulnerable. But she kept thinking about the messages she had received from other trauma survivors, other photojournalists, other people who felt broken and unsure if they could ever be whole again. If her story helped even a few people, the vulnerability was worth it. In January, Grace turned 68. The town threw her a birthday party at the community center. It was not just a birthday celebration. It was an acknowledgement of her contributions to Seaview, a thank you for her service, a recognition of how she had changed their community. Grace Turner, said Mayor Williams in a short speech, came to us seeking quiet and anonymity. We're grateful she stayed, grateful she became part of our fabric. And we're especially grateful that when our town needed her, she was willing to step out of her quiet life and into action. She reminds us that heroes are not always loud or obvious. Sometimes they're the quiet neighbor who pays attention and acts with courage. Grace stood awkwardly while people applauded. She still felt strange being celebrated, but she was learning to accept appreciation without deflecting it, to let people express their gratitude without minimizing her actions. Mrs. Henderson gave her a painting, a portrait of Grace at her easel, painted by a local artist. So, you can see yourself as we see you, Martha said, strong, talented, kind, and brave. Daniel presented her with a gallery catalog of her work, both paintings and photographs that he had printed, for when you need reminding of all you've accomplished. The children from her art class gave her a scrapbook they had made, filled with drawings of Grace, letters about what she meant to them, and their own artwork inspired by her teaching. Grace was overwhelmed. She had never expected this. Not the celebration, not the love, not the sense of belonging. She had come to Seaview broken and alone. Now she was celebrated and surrounded by people who cared about her. In her thank you speech, Grace said simply, "You gave me a home when I needed one. You gave me space to heal. You accepted me without knowing my full story. And when I was ready to emerge from my cocoon, you supported me. Thank you for making me part of this community. Thank you for showing me that home is not where you hide, it's where you're known and loved anyway." Spring came early, bringing warmth and renewal. Grace's garden bloomed enthusiastically. She painted, photographed, taught her classes. She continued her advocacy work, but more selectively now, focusing on projects that felt meaningful rather than accepting every invitation. Maria visited regularly, having become like family. She was excelling in nursing school, had a boyfriend who treated her well, and was planning to eventually sponsor her mother's immigration from Honduras. She had transformed from a frightened trafficking victim to a confident young woman building a good life. One April morning, Grace received an email from a high school teacher in Ohio. A student had read about Grace's story online and wanted to interview her for a project about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. "My student, Jasmine, is a junior who wants to be a photojournalist," the teacher wrote. "She's particularly interested in how to handle the emotional weight of documenting suffering. Your story resonated with her deeply. Would you be willing to do a video call interview?" Grace agreed. The following week, she spoke with Jasmine, a thoughtful 17-year-old with big questions about career, purpose, and how to stay mentally healthy while doing difficult work. "How do you not get overwhelmed by all the suffering?" Jasmine asked. "You do get overwhelmed sometimes," Grace said honestly. "The key is having support systems, taking breaks when needed, and maintaining parts of your life that bring joy. For me, painting became that refuge. For you, it might be something else. But you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself to help others. What if I see something terrible and it traumatizes me? What if I can't do the work anymore?" Then you stop, and that's okay. "I stopped for 25 years. I thought I'd never work again. But those skills, that passion, that commitment to truth, they remained inside me. They just needed time to heal. If you're meant to do this work, you'll find your way back to it, maybe in a different form. Do you have advice for someone starting out?" Grace thought carefully. "Remember why you're doing this. Document truth with compassion. Honor the people you photograph. They're trusting you with their stories. Don't exploit suffering for dramatic images. Seek to understand and illuminate, not to shock. And always, always take care of your mental health. This work is important, but it's not worth destroying yourself." They talked for an hour. Afterward, Grace felt energized. Mentoring young people felt like a natural extension of her journey. She could help them avoid some of the mistakes she made, prepare them better for the challenges ahead, and maybe help them find healthier ways to do difficult work. In May, Grace did something she had thought about for months. She planned a trip to visit Linda, the former war correspondent in Montana. They had been corresponding regularly, and Grace felt a deep connection with this woman who shared her experiences. She flew to Montana and rented a car, driving through beautiful mountain landscapes to Linda's small ranch house. Linda met her at the door, a woman in her 60s, weathered and strong, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Grace Turner, I've wanted to meet you for months." "Likewise." They spent 3 days together, hiking in the mountains, cooking meals, and talking endlessly about their shared experiences. Linda had covered the Balkans War and had witnessed an atrocity that broke her. Like Grace, she had fled journalism and built a quiet life far from conflict. "Do you ever feel like we failed?" Linda asked one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "Like we should have been stronger, should have kept going." "I used to feel that way," Grace said. "But I've learned that survival is not failure. We did the best we could with what we had, and we're still contributing, just in different ways. You mentor young writers through that program you volunteer with. I do speaking engagements and advocacy work. We're still bearing witness, still telling truth, still trying to make the world better." I like that framing. Not failure, just evolution. Exactly. We're not the people we were in our 20s and 30s. We've been changed by what we've seen and experienced. But we're still us, just different versions. On her last evening there, Linda showed Grace something she had never shown anyone: her personal photo archive from the war she covered. Together, they looked at images of suffering, courage, hope, and horror. Grace helped Linda see the power in these photos, the importance of the witness she had borne. "Have you ever thought about doing anything with these?" Grace asked. "Like what?" "An exhibition, a book, something that lets these stories be told. These people deserve to be remembered." Linda looked uncertain. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You might never feel completely ready. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't wait for ready. We just take the next step." When Grace left Montana, Linda was considering the idea. Grace had planted a seed. Whether it grew was up to Linda, but Grace hoped it would. The world needed more truth-tellers, more witnesses, more people willing to show difficult things with compassion. Summer brought the publication of Grace's book. The release was both exciting and terrifying. Grace did a small book tour, readings in independent bookstores, talks at libraries, a few media interviews. She was uncomfortable with the attention, but committed to the work. The book received strong reviews and reached an audience beyond what she had expected. Trauma survivors from many fields found resonance in her story. Photojournalists appreciated her honest discussion of occupational hazards. Advocates working against trafficking used it as a teaching tool. One review particularly moved Grace. It came from a literary journal and concluded, "Grace Turner's book is ultimately about transformation, not just from war photographer to painter to investigator, but from fragmented to whole, from hiding to emerging, from witnessing to acting." She shows us that healing is not about forgetting or erasing, but about integration and purpose. Her story is specific to her experiences, but universal in its lessons about courage, community, and the many ways we can make a difference in the world. At a book event in Portland, a young woman approached Grace during the signing. "I was trafficked 3 years ago," she said quietly. "I've been struggling to move forward. Your book helped me understand that healing isn't linear, that it's okay to have bad days, that I can use my experience to help others someday when I'm ready." Grace took the woman's hand. "You're already helping others by surviving, by being here, by sharing that with me. And when you're ready to do more, the world will be waiting for your gifts." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for seeing us, for caring enough to act, for showing that one person really can make a difference." These moments made the vulnerability worthwhile. Grace was touching lives, creating connections, offering hope. This was bearing witness in its most powerful form, not just documenting suffering, but creating meaning from it. In August, Grace received news that made her smile. Linda had decided to move forward with an exhibition of her war photography, opening at a gallery in Missoula. "You inspired me," Linda wrote. "Time to stop hiding my work and let these stories be told. Wish me luck." Grace immediately booked a flight to Montana for the opening. She would not miss this for anything. The exhibition was powerful. Images that captured both horror and humanity, suffering and resilience. Linda had written beautiful essays to accompany the photos, providing context and honoring the people she had photographed. At the opening, Grace watched Linda interact with viewers, explaining her work, answering questions, finally claiming her identity as a photojournalist again. She looked nervous, but also relieved, like someone who had been holding their breath for 20 years and could finally exhale. "Thank you," Linda said to Grace afterward, "for showing me the way back to myself. You did the hard work. I just reminded you it was possible." That reminder made all the difference. Driving back to Seaview after the Montana trip, Grace reflected on her journey. 3 years ago, she had been simply Grace the painter, living quietly, bothering no one, hiding from her past. Now she was Grace the photographer, painter, advocate, mentor, author, witness. She was known, visible, active in the world, and she was happy. Not in the simple, uncomplicated way she had been happy in her quiet anonymity. This happiness was richer, deeper, more complex. It included struggle and vulnerability and hard work. But it also included purpose and connection and the satisfaction of using her gifts fully. She thought about Sarah often, wishing her friend could see how her story had continued. Sarah would be proud, Grace thought. Proud that Grace had found her way back to photography. Proud that she had used it to help people. Proud that she was still bearing witness in her own way. As Seaview came into view, Grace felt gratitude wash over her. This town had saved her. It had given her space to heal, time to rest, community to belong to. And when she needed to emerge, it had supported that too. Home. Not just a place, but a feeling. Not just where you're comfortable, but where you're challenged to grow. Not just where you hide, but where you're known and loved in all your complexity. Grace pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, looking at her cottage with its garden and studio, its view of the ocean, its solid walls that had sheltered her through so many seasons. She had arrived here broken. She was leaving here, not physically, but metaphorically, whole. No, not leaving, expanding, growing beyond, but not abandoning, carrying Seaview with her wherever her work took her, but always returning to this home, these people, this place that had made her transformation possible. She grabbed her bag and walked to her door, already thinking about tomorrow's painting session, next week's art class, the speaking engagement she had agreed to in September. Her life was full in the best way, full of purpose, connection, creativity, and service. Grace Turner was finally fully herself. All of her pieces integrated, all of her identities claimed. Past and present no longer at war, but working together. And it was beautiful. 5 years later, Grace stood at the lighthouse on the point, her camera in hand, photographing the sunset. At 72, she moved a bit slower. Her joints complained more often, but her eye remained sharp and her hands steady. The lighthouse had been converted into a small museum and community center, featuring rotating exhibitions about Seaview's history. The current exhibition was Grace's, photographs spanning her entire career, from war zones to coastal scenes, from documentation of suffering to celebration of healing. Maria walked up the path with her 2-year-old daughter on her hip. Maria was a nurse now, specializing in trauma care, doing exactly what she had dreamed about. Her daughter, Sarah Grace, named for both Grace and her lost friend, had Grace's silver hair and her mother's bright smile. "Abuela," the little girl called. Grace had become honorary grandmother to Maria's daughter. "Hello, my darlings." Grace hugged them both. "How was your day?" "Long. Good." I had a patient today, another trafficking survivor. I was able to help her feel safe, help her understand she's not alone. It felt like full circle. You're doing Sarah's work. Both Sarahs. They walked through the museum together, looking at Grace's photos. Young Sarah Grace pointed at images, asking, "What's that?" about everything. Grace patiently explained each one in simple terms a toddler could understand. In one corner hung the photo Grace had taken of Maria 5 years ago, not as a victim, but as a survivor, strong and determined, eyes focused on the future. Next to it was Maria's nursing school graduation photo. The caption read, "From survivor to healer, one woman's journey." "I still can't believe this is me," Maria said, looking at the images. "Sometimes I wake up and can't believe I survived, can't believe I'm here, living this life." But you are. You did. You're remarkable. Because of you. No, Maria. Because of you. I just took pictures. You did the hard work of healing and rebuilding. They sat on a bench outside, watching the ocean. Little Sarah Grace played with shells on the ground. Grace thought about how much had changed in 5 years. The trafficking case had led to nationwide reform, stricter enforcement, better victim services. Her book had become required reading in many photojournalism and social work programs. She had trained hundreds of people in documentation techniques and community awareness. But more than the big impacts, Grace thought about the small ones. The individual conversations that had mattered, the students she had mentored, the survivors she had supported, the friends she had made, the community she had strengthened. Seaview had grown more vigilant without losing its welcoming spirit. People watched out for each other, reported suspicious activity, supported vulnerable community members. The town had learned that safety required participation, that protecting each other was everyone's responsibility. Grace's cottage remained her sanctuary, but she traveled more now, giving talks, attending photography exhibitions, visiting Linda in Montana and David in London, and dozens of other people she had connected with over the years. She had built a network of fellow witnesses, fellow healers, fellow truth-tellers. Her work, both paintings and photographs, sold well, with all proceeds from her photography going to anti-trafficking organizations and trauma support services. She lived modestly, needing little, giving away much. Chief Warren, now retired, walked by on his evening stroll. He stopped to chat. Beautiful evening. Perfect. How's retirement treating you? Well, but I miss the work sometimes. That case we worked together. That was the highlight of my career, you know. Reminded me why I became a cop in the first place. It changed all of us. Changed the whole town. It did. In good ways. We're more aware now, more connected. He smiled at little Sarah Grace. And we have the next generation to protect. That's what matters. After Warren left, Grace sat quietly, feeling the evening breeze, listening to the waves, watching the light fade. This was her life now, moments of peace punctuated by moments of action, quiet interspersed with engagement, rest balanced with service. She was not just Grace the painter, or Grace the photographer, or Grace the activist. She was all of these things, integrated and whole. Her trauma had shaped her, but not defined her. Her gifts had been used for suffering, but also for healing. Her story had been one of hiding, but also of emerging. Maria's phone buzzed. I have to go. Dinner to cook, husband to feed, bedtime routine to start. She picked up Sarah Grace. Say bye to Abuela. Bye, Abuela. Grace hugged them both. I love you. Love you too. See you Thursday for art class? Wouldn't miss it. Grace watched them walk back toward town, a young mother and her daughter building their life together. Maria was breaking cycles of trauma, creating safety for her child, passing on resilience and strength. It was beautiful to witness. As darkness fell, Grace walked home along the beach, her camera around her neck. She stopped occasionally to photograph the twilight, the way the fading light painted the water, the shapes of boats in the harbor, the warm lights coming on in town. Home. This word meant so much more to her now than it had 25 years ago when she first arrived in Seaview. Then, home had been refuge, escape, hiding. Now it was belonging, purpose, integration, love. At her cottage, Grace uploaded the day's photos to her computer. She looked through them, selecting the best, making small adjustments. Good light, interesting composition, emotional resonance. She still had the skills, still had the eye. They had survived her trauma and come back stronger. Before bed, Grace wrote in her journal, a practice she had maintained since arriving in Seaview. She wrote about the day, about Maria and Sarah Grace, about the exhibition, about feeling grateful. She wrote about Sarah Brennan, too, as she often did, keeping her friend's memory alive through words. Sarah, wherever you are, I hope you can see what our work became. Not just the war photography we did together, but what grew from it. The lives saved, the stories told, the healing that happened. You always said photography was about bearing witness. I've learned it's also about creating connection, building community, and inspiring action. I'm old now, Sarah. My body aches and my energy wanes. But my purpose remains clear. I will keep bearing witness as long as I can. Through my camera, my paintings, my words, my actions. Because this is who we are. This is what we do. Thank you for teaching me to see. Thank you for showing me that courage comes in many forms. Thank you for being my friend. I miss you every day, but I'm not lost anymore. I found my way home. Grace closed her journal and looked out the window at the night ocean. Stars reflected on dark water. The lighthouse beams swept across the bay in its eternal rotation. Somewhere in town, people were living their lives, cooking dinner, watching TV, putting children to bed, making love, dreaming dreams. And Grace was part of it all, woven into this community's fabric, both receiving and giving, both resting and working, both healed and healing. She had been many things in her 72 years: daughter, friend, photographer, witness, trauma survivor, painter, investigator, advocate, mentor, author, honorary grandmother. All of these identities were true. All of them were her. Grace Turner, who had documented war, survived trauma, found peace, and answered the call to action when her community needed her. Who had learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite it. Who had discovered that healing is not forgetting, but integrating. Who had proven that one person paying attention and taking action really can change lives. She was ordinary and extraordinary, broken and healed, quiet and powerful. She was simply herself, fully and finally, and that was enough. That was everything. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.